Hello, and welcome to Raising the Bar with the MBBA. I'm your co-host, Adeola Adejobi.
And I'm Jason Clark, president of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, the largest association predominantly African-American attorneys here in New York. So today we are very excited for today's show, where we're going to be talking about workers' rights in the era of COVID-19. So we have two terrific guests today. The first is the council member for the District 27, Daneek Miller. And then the second guest we have today is Laurie Morrison, who's a principal attorney in the law offices of Laurie Morrison. So welcome both of you to Raising the Bar with the MBBA.
Thank you so much. We're happy to be here.
Thank you so much for having us. This is an important topic, and we look forward to sharing information with our community.
Thank you. So let's get started. As everyone knows, we are in the midst of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, which is also why we are doing this show remotely. And one of the reasons we wanted to have this show is because when there are crises like this, we tend to see working class individuals really be the ones who get taken advantage of. And especially those who are our workers, you know, whether it's our essential workers, or whether it's people knowing what their protections are if they're non-essential workers. So to get us started off, Laurie, maybe you can tell us a little bit about why it's so important that we have protections in place to protect our workers.
Glad to do it. And I like to mention what I am an employee advocate. That's what I do all day, every day. So we've been very busy, fortunately and unfortunately, for this precise reason that we're talking about. As we've seen, COVID's hitting our communities apparently harder, right? And our workers are really suffering. So we need these protections just like we've always needed protections for workers. Why do we need these protections? Because history has shown and current day shows that sometimes employers do not make the best decisions when it comes to our workers, either intentionally or unintentionally. Employers and others, their main priority is getting business running, okay? It's not necessarily protecting the workers. So we need to have these measures to make sure that the protection of our workers and of our communities is not based on and reliant on the whims of their superiors, right? So our history has shown, our ancestors have fought for us to have these rights under law, so we don't have to beg anybody for anything. So we have to keep making sure that these measures occur, particularly when we have this pandemic, so that we are protected and we don't have to ask for it. We've already got it.
Thank you. Yeah, and a council member?
I agree 100%. I also, you know, my background is in labor. I'm a former president of the Amalgamated Transit Union, and thus my transition into the city council to advocate on behalf of workers. I chair the committee on civil service and labor in particular. And that transition was clearly representing the thousands of members, union members that I represented, but now impacting the lives of millions of workers in the city. And so that is very important, but it's important, as Council just mentioned, that workers are protected, because bottom line for businesses and managers are often profits and not people. And so how do we do that? We do that in a number of different ways. I'm coming from the world of organized labor. I have a different perspective, and that is that oftentimes creation of policy above collective bargaining, these are the things that are up to organized labor in a way, because these are professionals that do it well, but working collaboratively with partners and advocates. We've seen a lot of worker protections over the past few years, particularly in the council, sometimes even too much for myself, in that I think that policy governing workers is, as I said, is up to organized labor. And the interesting thing about that, in our community, District 27 or Southeast Queens has the largest union density or population in the entire country. And if you look at it in its totality, and that is a good thing, except for when we reach the times that we're in now of COVID, where you have all of these public employees, all of these workers essential workers that have to go out to provide these critical services. That means that we're leaving our community, or even sometimes driving buses, law enforcement, teaching, and doing all the other things within our community. That means you have to leave your household and you have to come back in. How do we ensure that there are provisions in place that in real time right now are protecting of people, as was mentioned earlier, that these aren't things that we're just beginning to talk about now, paid sick leave, paid family leave, and things of that nature. There are things that I worked on as an advocate, as a single parent 20 years ago, and just coming to fruition now. But now, as we say in the advocate world, that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And so now we have to make sure that we're bringing these issues to the forefront and really highlighting why they were necessary to begin with. And so even as we, we were on a congressional, a call with the New York congressional delegation, as well as the Senator Schumer and Gillibrand earlier in the week, and talking about one of the topics was workers' rights, and having uniform OSHA regulations, right? And what that means, right? Because when I sit down with the Office of Labor Relations, which kind of oversees about 400,000 municipal workers here in the city of New York, but different agencies, different bargaining units, they have no uniformity. And for this moment, although there are provisions, there are emergency managers in each agency, but there's no policy very specific to COVID being updated in a real-time basis, right? And so, because we know so much more this week than we knew last week or last month, right? And so those provisions around governing workers, how you, what PPEs are useful, how they are to be used, who will use them, how often is a cab and the EMS truck to be cleaned, or a bus or a subway car, and things like that have to be done in real time. And quite frankly, managers aren't really thinking about these things. They're thinking about head count. They're thinking about productivity. Can I get bodies out there to do this? How do I get them in and out? And it's like the canary in the coal mine, right? And that is up to all of us to make sure that we're protecting workers, because we're protecting family and community in doing so. And so that's what makes this so really important. But it's also like, as council can tell you, that we have policy, legislation, collective bargaining that we've been working on probably for the last 20, 30 years that have not come to fruition, that if we had these policies and procedures in place right now, that people would be better off.
I just wanted to add briefly everything. I agree with everything the councilman said. I'd like to add to that there are, even though there is a large percentage of workers who are unionized, there are many who are not, right? So the NLRB, the unionized collective bargaining protections do not apply to them, right? So that's also why we need these protections, because for the employees who are not unionized, where do they go? I actually was fortunate to work with the National Employment Lawyers Association, NELA, and we successfully lobbied to amend the New York State human rights law, right, to expand provisions, expand protections. Thank goodness that is now enacted, so at least they can get protections under that as well. But in terms of COVID directly, we need these protections now, because people are getting sick now. People are being forced back to work too early now. So we need to have enforcement and rights to enforce so that more people aren't getting sick. This is for our communities, and it's also for the world. It's for the larger nation. So these rights and these rules are fundamental to survival.
And actually, that's a great jumping off point. So, Laura, you actually mentioned essential workers. Can you discuss briefly what the difference is between essential workers and non-essential workers?
Well, in terms of, there's no bright line rule. What it's been found is that essential workers are being considered people who are directly related to maintaining the public health and safety, right? So our first responders, our officers, our doctors, our nurses, and people of that nature. What is also important to mention, though, is that the staff who assist those people are also being considered essential workers, right? So it's not just the, it's the first responders, but it's also the doctors and their assistants. It's also the people who do the billing. Okay, so essential workers has been broadly defined to a certain extent. And that's why, again, we also need protections, because things like billing can be done remotely.
Right.
Right. So we can still have the work and the benefit of the essential workers without putting as many people at immediate harm. So we need to definitely work on legislation for that. We need universal legislation, period, to assist all workers. We don't have that right now. We have little bits and pieces, but we really need to move to have universal paid sick leave.
I absolutely agree. And one of the things that even within the municipal workforce, even when they aren't unionized, obviously we have that environment, and that they are benefiting from those union policies and agreements, regulations. And so, but essential workers, that has been broadly defined, as you said. And so we're talking about the supermarket workers and pharmacies and so forth like that, and anyone who are involved in our daily activities that we need to get to and from, whether it's transit workers and others. Obviously, in the case of 9/11, we're talking about first responders and so forth, but that has been significantly expanded. Who is essential to our daily lives now, and obviously no more than the people that we have been taking for granted for so many years, the people who have historically not had the benefit of organized labor. They're, quite frankly, there are people of color, there are immigrant population, and people who are doing jobs that for low wages that most folks aren't necessarily going to do by choice. And so there are certainly provisions in place to protect them. In fact, those are some of the things that that I was talking about during the introduction, about some of the policies that the city council has done, that in my hopes, I would hope that, because when we do things, it's kind of the floor, right?
Right.
And not right. And so it's a lot way to go. And I don't want people to get in the door and get, like, we have the 5 paid sick for any paid sick for any employer, which has 5 or more employees. And certainly then we've expanded those in a different, in a number of different ways. We are now working on paid time off, which hasn't happened yet, but we're very hopeful that we can do it in the next legislative session. And so that would allow for, that would be an additional 10 days or 2 weeks to be used in the same type of way to maintain family. And quite frankly, we understand that as a society, we are much more productive when these things happen. And this has been the argument for a number of years. If in fact someone has at minimum 5 days, they don't have to come in, and oftentimes those are the people, these are the jobs that people that we don't allow them to social distance, right? The people that are working in retail and in restaurants and so forth, but they have to come to work sick, and the children are sick, and they have to come in after taking care of the children, and then come in and take the chance of either making coworkers ill or even customers or patrons. And so this is pivotal and important. But what we see, that we as a community, we are the workers, and so if we're not taking care of workers for a plethora of reasons, then we're impacting ourselves and the broader society, because these are family members that we have to take back into our homes and into our communities. If they go out and they're getting infected in the course of maintaining the city, then they're bringing that back home. So it is, there's 6 degrees of separation here. All things are relevant. We have to take care of workers, because, we have done things from a trickle-down perspective as a society, hoping that folks at the top are going to take care of us. And they're abandoning us for bomb shelters now. They're just running off, and they don't have to come out, that they could afford to not shop once a month and go wherever they're going. And there are folks who don't have the means and they have to do what they have to do and go out 2 or 3 times a day or a week to shop and do those things. How do we protect our communities and those workers? So it's very important that we put these provisions in place. And I think that we've done a great job over the past few years and have the environment that really understood the value of supporting workers. I think this brings it home, and it kind of also demonstrates where those loopholes are. And at the end of the day, because of the institutional neglect in communities of color, even with all of these protections and provisions, look what happened, that we still have by far the highest numbers of infection and lack of infrastructure to support our community. And so this is a real start in protecting workers, but we have to use it for this moment. And what do we learn coming out of it so that we put in place the policies and provisions that protect all workers at all times.
You talked about some of the legislation that you all are looking to put in place down the line. But for some of the people that might be watching, they might not even be sure exactly what their rights are or what's included in workers' rights. So can you talk a little bit about that? I know some of it has something to do with, paid sick leave and things like that, but there's clearly the stimulus package that came down, and there's some other things that are people's rights today that even if it doesn't apply to them, they can share with their community and their family members.
Yep, and I'm sure counsel will speak on that as well, but a lot of things that came out in the stimulus package around unemployment insurance, and now what you have an extended unemployment, which is additional time, but you also have non-traditional unemployment. So that means the what we see now, the gig economy, right? So there is a significant portion, particularly millennials and otherwise, that are working outside of the traditional workforce, right? So the gig economy, the sole proprietors and the 1099ers, they are now able to access unemployment in COVID-19. And so you can go online and find that information as well. We have it on my website, social media, and website as well, where you can link in and get that specific information. But even as this happens, as I'm, as I was saying, I was on the line with the congressional delegation, and the people that control the Senate, they are more interested in the economy than they are people. And so as distinguished counsel said, that, it's up to us to figure that out. There was a situation with Amazon. Everybody loves Amazon, but we had to threaten to, do some things if they didn't go in, sanitize the warehouse in Staten Island and give the workers the PPEs and protections that were necessary. And so we all, we all have a role to play in this, and being really supportive as we move forward and get this information out. And back in the old days, it used to be kind of if you or your parents or anybody belonged to a union household, monthly, the AFL-CIO, or whether it was state or a national governing body, would put out companies who were good for workers, but also who did the wrong thing, right? And people who we should be supporting. We have to be cognizant of that, right? There are folks within this community that have not done the right thing by our community, and this is not the time or place to call them out, but they deserve to be called out. And so how do we support them? Also, how do we get information out that we leverage our power, whether it's dollars or whatever else, to make sure that happens, right?
Yeah, thank you, council member. So yeah, if I could interject there. So there are a couple of things that I heard I think are important to highlight. So, when we're talking about workers' rights, people should know that they have the right to paid sick leave, the right to family leave.
Right.
That if they're making a certain number, if they're making $75,000 or less as an individual, they're entitled to financial stimulus package, and they also have extended unemployment benefits.
That's right.
And for those who have questions when we're talking about essential workers, whether an essential worker or not an essential worker, I would recommend they go to the governor's or the New York governor NYGov website, where it lists who are who are essential workers and who are not essential workers. And if for whatever reason you think that you are not an essential worker, but are being told that you have to go to work, what I'd recommend is that you reach out to a local law enforcement office, such as the New York State Attorney General's office, which has been working on sending cease and desist letters to make sure workers' rights are being protected. So I know
I
we
can
only
add to that as well.
yeah, and actually that's perfect, because I'm actually about to send it off to you, because we only have a couple of minutes left. But when we're talking about what you should do if you feel like you're being discriminated against as a worker or retaliated, Laurie, what are some of the things that our guests should keep in mind?
You got it. Let me just say this first. Essential workers are not being treated as essential workers, especially those in our community. And even if we have unionized workers, my dad was a Teamster from 1970s to the 90s when he passed. He was a union member, but he still wasn't getting the protections he needed. So we're being marginalized even within what's supposed to be our protections. Okay, so that's also why it's so important to have these protections in place. I think it's also important to mention that there's a federal family first law. Okay, that gives you protections. Under the New York City and New York State laws, you get protections. So look under those guidelines online. You can readily find them under Department of Labor, in the NELA's website. There are many places to look for that. Also, look at the employer's leave laws. The employers might already have leave laws in place that employees can use to benefit from that as well. Already in place. All of these are already there. Yes, they can reach out to the AG's office, but they can also reach out to employment attorneys like myself who can assist them and guide them accordingly. On top of that, let's not forget that there are already discrimination laws in place, right? As I said, I lobbied with NELA to go ahead and expand the New York State human rights law, okay? Those still apply. So if an employer is requiring someone who has a disability, for instance, someone who has autoimmune deficiency, diabetes, some other types of deficiencies where going to work makes them particularly at risk, well, then they have benefits of the ADA. They have benefits of New York State and New York City human rights laws because they are disabled. And a reasonable accommodation is also requesting time to stay home and to work from home, and other type of reasonable accommodations, provided the employer cannot show an undue hardship from having them work from home. They can absolutely benefit from the rights and the ability to have an attorney like myself or someone or on their own, and a doctor's note stating they have they're disabled for these reasons and they need protections. They need to be able to work from home and or have medical leave. Okay, we've also got the FMLA that protects you. Both protects the worker and protects the worker who needs to have a leave for their own and or for a family member's illnesses. Okay, so we do already have some protections, but by no means are they enough. Okay, so definitely look online for those sources. When someone has been required to go back to work and or the company is violating the laws that are already in place, like the Family and Medical Leave Act, or like the ADA, or like the New York State, New York City human rights laws. What do? Well, it depends on what's being violated. If we have violations of the workers' laws, like the New York Human Rights Law and or ADA, FMLA, call an attorney, okay? Because an attorney can help you. Attorney like myself, that's what I do every day, okay? But you don't necessarily need an attorney to get your rights. You can do it pro se as well, okay? So the people, our communities in particular, but all people are empowered to bring their rights on their own as well. I'm an attorney and I do what I do and I love what I do, but I wanna make sure that the people understand that you are empowered to do and protect yourself as well. So if you're not happy with whatever legal representation that you can get, or if you can't find an attorney, go ahead and get your rights on your own. You have that ability. You can look up on the court's websites, you can look at the Department of Labor, you can go on other websites and find the laws that protect you. Go to the EEOC, file a charge with the EEOC, file a charge with the New York Human Rights Division, and what have you. You have those rights. Also under OSHA, OSHA has set provisions online that you can find to gain protections when you believe your rights have been infringed. And other laws have similar provisions to show you where to go reach out to the AG's office, different ways that you can get your protections when you believe that they are being violated.
Clearly there's so much more that we could actually talk about today. We want to thank you so much for joining us on our show. We want to thank you for watching Raising the Bar with the Metropolitan Black Bar Association on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And we'll see you next time.